Okay, so now let's move into the process of respiration. Process of respiration. Okay, so here this is a little bit complex process, and that is occurring in three stages, people. Okay, three stages are there for this process. Understood? First of all, people, the gas in the external environment has to be taken into our lungs. Understood? Therefore, that is called as inhalation, people. And also the gas is taken out from your body, out from your lungs, that is called as exhalation. Understood? So the gas exchange between the external environment and the lungs is your first stage of the process. Okay, and that is called as ventilation. Understood? So as your second process, people, the gas that we take into our lungs is going to diffuse into your blood capillaries. Understood? So that is your second stage. And also the the other gases like carbon dioxide and water vapor is going to diffuse from the blood capillaries into the lungs. Okay, so that is your second process, gas exchange between the alveoli. And third, as the last stage, people, we have cellular respiration. Okay, so the oxygen that we taken into your blood capillaries is going to react with the glucose molecules in your body cells, and it is going to produce energy. So that is your last stage. Understood? So now we'll see each and every process. Okay, there are three stages with the respiratory process. So now let's see what are those three processes. Okay, people, now let's move into your respiratory system. Okay, I have drawn a rough sketch of your respiratory system. What happens? Your respiratory system is going to start from the nasal cavity. Your respiratory system is going to start from the nasal cavity. Your respiratory system is going to start from your nasal cavity. Okay, so the lining of the nasal cavity, I have enlarged the lining of your nasal cavity. Okay, so this is that diagram. Okay, so this is the epithelium lining in the nasal cavity. Okay, so it contains goblet cells, people. Okay, so these goblet cells will secrete mucus into the nasal cavity. These goblet cells will secrete mucus into the nasal cavity. Okay, so it has a thin layer of mucus, therefore this your nasal cavity has a moist like nature. Understood? Also, people, this epithelium has another important structure called cilia. This cilia is a hair-like structure. Okay, hair-like structures are present in the epithelium of the nasal cavity. What happens, people? You know, the air in the external environment is a mixture. Okay, it doesn't only contain oxygen gas. It contains dust particles. It contains harmful microorganisms. Then what else? Other gases are present in the air. So before entering that air into the lungs, people, it has to get purified. Okay, so that purification of the air is done in your nasal cavity. Understood? Purification of the air is done in your nasal cavity. Okay, what happens? When you take air into the nasal cavity, the dust particles and other harmful microbes are going to trap in this cilia. Okay, this cilia is a hair-like structure so that it can trap the particles. Okay, what happens with the mucus, people? The cilia is going to send or push the dust particles into the pharynx. Okay, in the pharynx it is going to mix with the saliva and taken out from your body. Understood? So this cilia has a rhythmic movement and it will pass the dust particles with the mucus into the pharynx, and in the pharynx it is going to mix with the saliva and taken off from your body. Okay, so this is called as mucus escalation. Understood? This is a very important function when purifying or when removing the foreign substances from the air that you take into your body. Understood? In the nasal cavity, people, okay, in your nasal cavity, air gets humidified. Also, when the air is passing through the nasal cavity, it is warmed up, people. It is warmed to the room temperature. Okay, it is warmed to the room temperature. And also, people, in the nasal cavity, within your nasal cavity, people, the foreign particles are going to remove. Okay, so these three functions are happening when the air is rushing through your nasal cavity. What happens, people? The air is getting warmed up to the room, sorry, not the room temperature, right? The body temperature. Sorry, right? Your body temperature. So the first function is that the air is going to warmed up to the body temperature, and then people, air is getting humidified. Why is that? You have the mucus present in the nasal cavity, right? So that mucus is going to humidify the air, and then people, removing of the foreign particles. Understood? I told you the dust particles and harmful microbes get trapped in this hair-like structure, and with the mucus, people, this cilia is going to rhythmically pass that into the pharynx, and in the pharynx it is going to mix with saliva and taken out from your body. Okay, so that is the nasal cavity. Below the nasal cavity there is a common passage, people, we call that as the pharynx. We call that as the pharynx. When I teach you the digestive system, I taught you pharynx is a common passage for both the respiratory system and the digestive system. Okay. Then people, below the pharynx you have a very important part, important structure, that is your larynx, people. So this larynx contains elastic fibers. Elastic fibers, and these elastic fibers are the vocal cords, people. Okay, vocal cords. Your vocal cords are present in the larynx. Understood? So when these vocal cords are vibrated, people, it will produce sound. It will produce sound. Okay. So when I am teaching, the sound is produced, right? So my vocal cords are going to vibrate and produce that sound. Understood? So below the pharynx you have the larynx. In the larynx, people, you can find the vocal cords. When air is passing through these vocal cords, people, sound is generated or sound is produced. Understood? So below the larynx, people, there is a tube-like structure called the trachea. A tube-like structure. The tube-like structure called the trachea is present. Understood? So this trachea is surrounded by cartilaginous rings. Okay, C-shaped rings are around the trachea. Okay, so why is that? Your airways has to be kept open. Okay, every time, people, your airways has to be kept open. Okay, so this flowing of air into the lungs has to become a continuous process. Okay, continuously, people, air has to pass through your respiratory tract. Therefore, to keep the airways open, it is surrounded by cartilaginous rings. Understood? So you have the trachea. So this trachea then branches into two parts called as bronchus. You have two bronchus lying into both the lungs. Okay, you have the bronchus here. Okay, so bronchus also contain the cartilaginous rings. Then, people, this bronchus is going to divide into small branches. Okay, bronchus is going to divide into small branches called bronchioles. It is going to divide into small branches called bronchioles. Okay, so at the end of the bronchioles, people, there is a very important tiny structure. Okay, large number of air sacs are present at the end of this bronchioles. Okay, so that is called as alveoli, people. That is called as alveoli. Okay, so this alveoli is the structural unit. Alveoli is the structural unit of your respiratory system. Okay, so in this alveoli, people, gas exchange with the blood capillaries occur. Understood? So hope you understand that. Also, people, your thoracic cavity is protected by the rib cage. Okay, your rib cage is going to protect the thoracic cavity. Okay, so the rib cage is connected with the sternum. Okay, those are bones. This rib cage is connected with the sternum in front. Okay, so then you have the sternum. Then people, you have the rib bones here. Okay, and within these ribs, people, there is a what you call very important tissue present. It is called as intercostal muscles. Okay, intercostal muscles. These intercostal muscles are lying in between the ribs. Understood? So during ventilation, your sternum, intercostal muscles and rib muscles are used. Understood? So there are people, another important structure is also functioning in ventilation. That is your diaphragm. Okay, diaphragm. This is also another important structure. Okay, so this is a skeletal muscle. Okay, your diaphragm is a skeletal muscle, and this is going to divide your thoracic cavity from your abdominal cavity, people. Okay, it acts as a mechanical barrier between the thoracic cavity and your abdominal cavity. The thoracic cavity is the top part and your abdominal cavity is the lower part. So this acts as a mechanical barrier between them. This is a skeletal muscle present. Understood? So if I quickly recap the part, air is going to enter into your respiratory tract from the nasal cavity, people. Okay, so in your nasal cavity, mainly three functions are occurring there. Understood? So when the air is passing, it is going to warmed up to the body temperature. Okay, and then it get humidified. Also, people, foreign particles are going to remove in the nasal cavity. What happens? The dust particles and harmful microbes get trapped in this cilia, and with this cilia, people, along with the mucus, this cilia is going to send the dust particles into the pharynx, and in the pharynx it is going to mix with saliva and take the waste materials out of your body. Understood? So this is called as mucus escalation. Okay, and then people, you have the pharynx. Pharynx is a common passage for your digestive tract and your respiratory tract. Then below the pharynx you have the larynx. Larynx contains some elastic fibers, called as these vocal cords. Okay, when the air is rushing through the vocal cords, people, sound is produced. Understood? Then you have the trachea. Trachea contains cartilaginous rings. Why? Always to keep the airways open. Understood? And then this trachea is branched into two structures called the bronchus. Okay, it also contains those cartilaginous rings, and this bronchus is going to divide into small branches, that is bronchioles. Understood? At the end of this bronchioles, people, you have the alveoli, and alveoli is the structural unit of the respiratory system. Okay, and then I forgot, people, your bronchioles and alveoli is within a muscular structure that is called as the lungs. Okay, so your lungs contain the bronchioles and alveoli. Understood? Then people, this thoracic cavity is protected by the rib cage, and this rib cage has the sternum in front and it has the rib bones. Understood? So between the rib bones, people, you can find the elastic muscle that is intercostal muscles. Okay, this is very important during ventilation. Also, people, as the last part, you have the diaphragm. This diaphragm is separating your thoracic cavity from your abdominal cavity. Okay, so and also this is a muscle, skeletal muscle. So that is about your respiratory system, people. Hope you understand. Okay, so in your book you don't have a very deep description about your respiratory system, but hope you understand this. Okay, now let's move into ventilation process. Okay, so now people, we are going to look into the ventilation mechanism. Okay, so I have drawn your lungs in a rough sketch like this. Okay, so during this ventilation, people, what happens? Inhalation and exhalation occurs during the ventilation of lungs. Understood? Inhalation and exhalation. Inhalation means, people, you inhale air, you take air into the lungs. Understood? Exhalation means you take air out of your lungs. Exhale, you expire the air. Understood? So let's see the process. Okay, let's see the mechanism. What happens, people? As your first step, if I talk about the inhalation. Inhalation. Okay, inhalation. This inhalation is an active process, people. Inhalation means taking air into the lungs. This is an active process. Active process means, people, you need the, what you call, the energy is consumed during the process. Okay, some amount of energy is consumed, is used up during the process. So this inhalation is an active process. That means it can, what you call, consume ATP. This is an active process, people. It's an active process. Okay, amount of energy is required during inhalation. Understood? What happens? This is your diaphragm. Okay, so what you call this has a curved nature. This has a curved nature, and this is skeletal muscle. I told you that previously. So this is your diaphragm. This is your diaphragm. And then, people, here you have the rib bones. This is your ribs. Okay. And then you have the intercostal muscles. These are your intercostal muscles. Okay, intercostal muscles. So what happens, people? This is your trachea, right? This is your lungs. What happens, people? During inhalation, your diaphragm is going to contract. Okay, during inhalation, your diaphragm is going to contract and increase its curvature. Okay, this is going to contract and push down, people. During inhalation, your diaphragm is going to contract and push down. Diaphragm is going to contract and push down. Okay, when this diaphragm is pushed down, people, what happens? Your intercostal muscles are going to contract. When this is pushed down, these intercostal muscles contract and push the ribs upwards. Okay, and it will push these ribs upwards like this. Okay, this is pushed down, contracted and pushed down, people. And then what happens? The intercostal muscles are going to contract and push this away, push this upwards. These ribs are pushed upwards. Okay, when these ribs are pushed upwards, people, your sternum is going to push forward. Okay, when your ribs are moving up, the sternum is moving forward. Okay, therefore, people, when that is happening, what happens? The size of your thoracic cavity increases. Okay, the size of your thoracic cavity is increased. What happens? This diaphragm is going to contract and push down. When this is pushed down, people, your intercostal muscles are going to contract. When these intercostal muscles are contracted, it will push your ribs upwards. When the rib cage is moving up, people, the sternum will move forward. Okay, thereby the size of the cavity will increase. Okay, size of the cavity will increase. When the size of this cavity is increased, people, what happens? The volume of the cavity increases. The volume of the cavity increases. What happens when the volume increases? Okay, when the volume increases, people, the pressure decreases according to the Boyle's law. The pressure decreases. Okay, as an example, if I get a syringe, people, okay, if I put the needle away and if I drag the plunger and keep my finger in the syringe, what happens? When I drag the plunger, when I increase the volume, I can feel a suction in my finger. What happens when the volume is increased, people? A space is created. Okay, when the volume is increased, a space is created and the pressure is decreased there. Okay, so always you have to keep in your mind, people, air travels from high pressure area into a low pressure area. Okay, air travels from high pressure gradient into a low pressure gradient. Understood? So what happens? To fill that space, people, air is dragged in. Understood? That's why I am feeling a suction there. Okay, when the volume is increased, people, the pressure in that goes down. Okay, so what happens? Thereby the same thing happens here. When the volume is increased, people, the pressure within the lungs decreases. Okay, the pressure within the lungs decreases than the atmospheric pressure, people. Okay, so The external environment contains air, contains gases, understood? So it contains a certain amount of pressure. So what happens? The lungs will reduce its pressure than the pressure in the external environment, understood? So the pressure within the lungs will decrease relative to the atmospheric pressure, understood? So what happens, people? I taught you always the gases move from high pressure area to low pressure area. Always gases move from high pressure area to low pressure area, understood? So what happens when the size of the thoracic cavity increase and when the volume is increased, the pressure decreases. When this pressure is decreased, people, it will decrease relative to the atmospheric, it will be lower than the atmospheric pressure. So air moves from high pressure area to low pressure area. Air moves from high pressure area to low pressure area. Therefore air starts flowing into the lungs. What happens? Air starts moving into the lungs. Hope you understand that. Then people, during exhalation, what happens? Okay, so this exhalation can be an active process or a passive process. Okay, so if the person is at rest, this exhalation will be a passive process. That means no energy is consumed, understood? But if the person is for example thinking during exercises, okay, so then exhalation will be an active process. Okay, so normally this exhalation can be active or passive. Okay, it can be active or passive, understood? So what happens during exhalation, people? What happens during exhalation? Exhalation means, people, expiring the air, taking the air out of your lungs. What happens during that, people? This diaphragm is going to relax and come into its original state. Okay, it is going to reduce its curvature. Okay, it is going to relax. Diaphragm is going to relax. Diaphragm is going to relax. And what happens? Your intercostal muscles are stretchable, people. Okay, so they are going to snap back into its original state. Understood? What happens? They are going to relax. Your intercostals are going to relax and bring the ribs into its original position. Okay, then what happens, people? The ribs will gain its original state. It will reduce its size, people. Okay, when ribs will move downwards and your sternum will come back. So what happens, people? The size of the cavity decrease. Okay, so what happens? Your intercostals are going to relax so that ribs will move down and come into its original state. It will come down, understood? Then your the sternum will move backwards, people. Okay, so reducing the size of the lungs, reducing the size of the thoracic cavity. Then, people, when the size is reduced, what happens? The volume is decreased. When the volume is decreased within the lungs, the pressure within the lungs increases. When the volume of the lungs decreases, the pressure will increase within the lungs. So now what happens, people? The pressure within the lungs increase than the atmospheric pressure. Okay, so the pressure within the lungs increase than the atmospheric pressure. So previously I told you, people, always air moves from high pressure to low pressure. Always air moves from high pressure to low pressure. Then what happens, people? When the pressure within the lungs, when the pressure in this cavity increase, people, air within this cavity moves out. Okay, so why is that? Because air travels from high pressure to low pressure. Understood? So air will move out of your lungs. So thereby expiration happens. Understood? Okay, during inhalation you take air into the body, into the lungs, and during exhalation you are going to expire. You are going to take the air out of your lungs. So this is your ventilation mechanism, people. Hope you understand. Understood? Okay, people. So now we are going to look into gaseous extremes in alveoli. Okay. So this is the enlarged diagram of the alveoli. Okay, so you know the bronchioles, at the end of the bronchioles there are large number of tiny air-filled sacs, and that is called as alveoli. And this is one alveolus I have what you call enlarged the diagram. Understood? So what happens, people? Oxygen is brought into the alveoli. Okay, oxygen is brought into the alveoli. Oxygen is brought into the alveoli. Understood? And this is a blood capillary, people. Okay, this is a blood capillary. This blood capillary brings the deoxygenated blood into the alveoli. Understood? So it is going to bring deoxygenated blood. Deoxygenated blood means, people, no oxygen present in this blood. Okay, this deoxygenated blood contains carbon dioxide and water. Okay, this contains carbon dioxide and water. Okay, carbon dioxide and water vapor is present. Understood? And here you can see oxygen is present. So what happens, people? This oxygen is going to dissolve and diffuse into the blood capillaries. Why is that, people? It is happening across the concentration gradient. Okay, the concentration of oxygen within the alveolus is higher than the oxygen concentration in your blood capillaries. So what happens? This gas passes through the concentration gradient from higher concentration to a lower concentration. What happens, people? This oxygen is going to dissolve and diffuse into the blood capillaries. Okay, then the red blood cells, then the blood in this blood capillary, people, what happens? It is getting oxygenated. Understood? That means oxygen is present in the blood. Okay, what happens when oxygen is diffused into the blood capillaries, people? Carbon dioxide and water vapor is diffused out of the blood capillaries into the alveoli. Across the concentration gradient. Okay, what happens? So here the concentration of carbon dioxide and water vapor is high. Understood? Therefore, and the carbon dioxide and water vapor in the alveoli is also low in the previous case, right? It is low when oxygen is entering into the alveolus. So what happens, people? Carbon dioxide and water will diffuse into the alveolus and taken out of the body during expiration. Understood? Thereby, people, the deoxygenated blood will get oxygenated during this process. Okay, what happens? The blood gets oxygen through this process. Understood? So to do this, people, there is several adaptations. To do this activity, there are several adaptations of this alveoli, people. Okay. So people, the respiratory surface is the wall of the alveoli. Okay, so if they ask what is the respiratory surface here, it is the wall of the alveoli. Wall of alveoli. Wall of the alveoli is the respiratory surface. So you can see a single epithelium is lining, and this is thin and permeable. Understood? So that this oxygen can dissolve and diffuse into the blood capillaries. Okay, what happens, people? This has a thin wall. Thin and permeable. Okay, thin and permeable. Also, these alveoli are highly vascularized, people. That means large number of blood capillaries are present surrounding this alveolar air sacs. Okay, why is that? To make the process more efficient. Okay, highly vascularized. Okay, so it has a thin permeable layer, people, and also it is highly vascularized. That means large number of blood capillaries are surrounding the alveoli. And then, people, what are the other adaptations of the alveoli for a efficient gas exchange? There are large number of alveoli, people. Small, tiny, large number of alveoli to increase the surface area. Okay, so in your book they have given thin, moist, large number of blood capillaries and large number of alveolar sacs people. Okay, so we'll write that as large number to increase the surface area, right? Okay, large number of alveoli are present to increase the surface area for efficient gas exchange. Understood? So hope you understand what happens. Oxygen is what you call entering into the alveolus, and then people it is going to diffuse according to the concentration. It is going to diffuse into the blood capillaries, and carbon dioxide and water in the blood capillaries are diffused back into the alveoli, and that is taken out from your body. Understood? So thereby the blood is getting oxygenated in this process. Okay, so your respiratory surface is the wall of the alveoli, and that is thin and permeable, highly vascularized, and large number of what you call alveolar sacs are present to make this process, to make this gas exchange more efficient. Hope you understand that part. Okay. Okay, people. So now we'll move into cellular respiration. Okay, this is a small part, and we have talked about this previously. What happens, people, in this cellular respiration? The glucose molecules, understood, especially the glucose molecules, are going to react with the oxygen in the blood capillaries, and it is going to produce energy. Okay, so this is the last stage of your respiratory process. Okay, what happens, people? The cellular respiration is the process of oxidation of simple foods. Okay, simple foods, as an example, I will take glucose. Okay, so oxidation of simple foods means, people, this glucose is going to combine with oxygen. Okay, so in the previous stage, okay, in the previous step, when the gas is exchanged with the alveoli and the blood capillaries, I showed you that the oxygen will diffuse into the blood capillaries. Okay, so the glucose molecules will react with the oxygen present in the blood capillaries, and it will produce what, people? It will produce carbon dioxide, sorry, first of all I will take the glucose will react with oxygen, and then it will produce carbon dioxide, water vapor, and energy. Okay, this is the process of producing, this is the final process of producing the energy. Okay, so you know many processes are involved to produce the energy, but this is the final stage. Okay, here what happens, people? Oxidation of simple foods. Simple foods means, people, example, this glucose is going to react with oxygen to produce energy. Okay, energy is produced for biological activities in the cell. Okay, for biological activities in the cell. Okay, so here you have glucose is reacted with the oxygen, and it will release carbon dioxide, water vapor, and energy. We write it as will form carbon dioxide, water, and energy is produced. Okay, so you have 6 carbon here, and you have to have 6 carbon here. Altogether there has to be 12 hydrogen. So here you have to get 12 hydrogen, and then you need to have 6 oxygen. 6 oxygen. So here if I balance the oxygen, here you have 6 times 12, 18 oxygen. Then what happens, people? We'll put 6 here to balance the oxygen. So here altogether you have 16 oxygen, right? 6 times 2 is 12 and 6, 18 oxygen molecules. And here people you have 6, you have 12 and 6, 18 oxygen molecules. Okay, so the equation is balanced. Understood? So this is the chemical formula of this process. Okay, so what happens? Glucose is reacted with oxygen and these products are formed. Okay, so this cellular respiration occurs in two ways, as aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration. Aerobic respiration takes place in the presence of oxygen and anaerobic respiration takes place without oxygen. Understood? What happens, people? The energy that is generated from aerobic respiration is higher than the energy generated through the anaerobic respiration, because during anaerobic respiration this glucose breakdown, it does not break down completely. Understood? Partially glucose is broken down. Understood? So here the energy generated is high than this. Understood? So when we are taking anaerobic respiration, people, it has two types: alcohol fermentation and lactic acid fermentation. This alcohol fermentation is occurring in plant cells and yeast cells, and lactic acid fermentation is happening in animal cells. Understood? What happens? These glucose molecules will break down into carbon dioxide, ethyl alcohol and energy. Energy is produced here also, but it is low comparatively to the energy produced in aerobic respiration. Here people, these glucose molecules will break down and lactic acid and energy will be produced. Understood? So this is simply the cellular respiratory process. Okay, and also people, you need to know the energy that is generated. The energy that is generated, people, from cellular respiration. The energy that is generated, part of the energy is sent out of the body as heat. Okay, part of the energy is used to generate heat and the rest is stored as ATP. Okay, ATP is the form of storing this energy, adenosine triphosphate. Understood? When there is energy requirement, people, what happens is ATP is going to break down and produce energy. Okay, so what happens? Part of the energy is taken to produce the heat and the rest is stored as ATP. This ATP acts as an energy carrier. Then store and release energy. Understood? So these are the three functions of ATP. Okay, so this is called as the universal energy carrier. Understood? So hope you understand this part. And your next part is, people, about your diseases related with the respiratory system. So you know that I'm not going to teach you about the diseases. Okay, I'm not going to teach you about the diseases, but I will show you how to apply that into a table. Okay, so you have the diseases. Okay, the first one is causal evasion. Okay, so if you can give a description about the disease also, it's okay, but you don't need that, right? You need to know the causal evasion, then the symptoms, and then prevention. Understood? So fill this table so that you can get an idea about the diseases related to your respiratory tract. Okay, so hope you understand, people. So here from this part, your second second part of this unit is done, right? So we talked about digestion and then we have respiration, and respiration is completed from this